Elena Whitmore stepped down from the coach with a small leather bag in her hand. The evening air was cool, and the sky above Ashworth Manor was turning orange and gray. She looked up at the huge stone house before her. It had tall windows, thick walls, and a heavy wooden door that looked like it had seen 100 years of history. She did not knock on the front door. Instead, she walked around to the side entrance, the one used by workers and servants. She knew this house did not know her face. She had planned it that way. A tall man with sharp eyes and a stiff collar opened the door before she could even raise her hand. He looked at her plain brown dress, her simple shoes, and the small bag she carried. He did not ask her name. "You must be the new girl from the village," he said. "You are late. Follow me." Elena opened her mouth for a moment, then closed it again. She gave a small nod and followed him inside. The man's name was Mr. Pembroke, and he was the head steward of Ashworth Manor. He walked fast through narrow halls, past the kitchen where pots were boiling, past a room full of folded linens, until they reached a small chamber near the back of the house. "This will be your room," he said. "You start work at 5 in the morning. Breakfast is at 4:30. Do not be late again." Before Elena could say a single word, he was already walking away, calling out orders to someone else down the hall. Elena sat down on the small bed. It was hard and narrow, nothing like what she was used to as a child, but she did not complain. She had chosen this path herself, and she had her reasons. The next morning, Elena woke before the sun. She dressed in the plain uniform left for her and walked down to the kitchen. The other servants were already there, moving quickly, carrying trays, washing pots, cutting bread. A young woman with red cheeks and kind eyes looked at her. "You're new, aren't you?" "I'm Mary. I work in the laundry." "I'm Elena," she said softly. "Well, Elena, you better hurry. Mrs. Griggs does not like slow workers." Mary smiled and handed her a stack of plates. "Take these to the dining hall. Careful, they're heavy." Elena carried the plates with steady hands. She walked with her back straight and her steps quiet, like someone who had been taught manners long ago, but no one noticed. To them, she was just another servant girl. For the next 3 days, Elena worked hard. She scrubbed the stone floors until her knees ached. She carried baskets of wet linen up and down the stairs. She peeled vegetables in the kitchen until her fingers turned red from the cold water. She said very little, and she never complained. The other servants began to like her. She was calm, careful, and kind. She helped Mary fold the heavy sheets without being asked. She never gossiped about the family upstairs, even when the others whispered about them during meal breaks. But there was something different about Elena that some of the staff began to notice. One evening, while setting the table for dinner, a young footman named Thomas made a mistake. He was practicing how to say the French names of the dishes for the evening meal, since the family had guests visiting from France. He said the words wrong, stumbling over them. Without thinking, Elena corrected him gently. "It's pronounced like this," she said, and she spoke the words perfectly, with an accent so smooth it sounded like she had spoken French her whole life. Thomas stared at her. "How do you know that?" Elena's cheeks turned pink. I heard it once. From a traveler," she said quickly, looking down at the plates in her hands. At that moment, the Duke of Ashworth walked into the room to check on the dinner preparations. He was a tall man, with gray hair at his temples, and sharp, thoughtful eyes. He heard the last part of the conversation and looked at Elena with curiosity. "Say that again," he said. Elena felt her heart beat faster. She repeated the French words, keeping her eyes low. The Duke studied her for a moment. "Where are you from, girl?" "The village nearby, my lord," she answered quietly. He looked at her a moment longer, as if trying to remember something, or someone. Then he shook his head slightly, as though brushing away a strange thought. "Carry on," he said, and walked out of the room. Elena let out a breath she did not know she was holding. That night, in the servants' quarters, the housekeeper, Mrs. Griggs, was going through supply lists. She handed Elena a piece of paper and asked her to write down the count of candles and soap for the week. Elena wrote quickly, her handwriting neat and elegant, each letter perfectly shaped, almost like the writing in old books kept in grand libraries. Mrs. Griggs took the paper back and stared at it. She looked up at Elena, then back down at the paper again. "This is very fine handwriting for a kitchen girl," she said slowly. Elena said nothing, only smiled politely, and went back to her work. Word began to spread quietly among the staff. Some said Elena must have worked for a rich family before. Others whispered that she might be running away from something, or someone. A few thought she might have been a governess who lost her position. No one knew the truth, and no one dared ask her directly, because among servants, it was not polite to question another person's past. Elena kept working, kept her head down, and kept her secret close to her heart. Then, one morning, everything at Ashworth Manor changed. Mr. Pembroke gathered all the staff in the main hall. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking slightly as he held a letter. "Her Majesty Queen Charlotte will be visiting Ashworth Manor," he announced. "She will arrive in 5 days' time." The room fell into stunned silence, and then it burst into noise. Servants gasped, some clapped their hands together in excitement, others looked terrified at the amount of work that needed to be done. "The Queen herself coming here," Mary whispered to Elena, her eyes wide. "I never thought I would see a queen in my whole life." Elena said nothing, but her heart felt heavy in a strange way. She had known the Queen once, a long time ago, in a life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. The next 5 days were full of chaos. The entire house was cleaned from top to bottom. Every piece of silver was polished until it shined like a mirror. Every carpet was beaten free of dust. Every window was washed until it sparkled in the sunlight. The gardens were trimmed, the flowers were arranged, and new candles were placed in every room. Elena was given the task of polishing silver in the dining hall, along with 2 other servants. She worked quietly, her hands moving with practiced care, rubbing each spoon and fork until it gleamed. She thought about the years that had passed. She thought about her father, who had once been a respected earl, loved by many, trusted by the crown. She thought about the day everything fell apart, when false accusations destroyed his name and his position. She thought about how she had watched her family's world crumble, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but shame and quiet corners, where people used to smile and greet them. She had been young then, but she remembered the Queen's kindness. They had known each other since childhood, playing in the same gardens, sharing secrets under the same trees. But when her father fell from grace, Elena could not bear the pity in people's eyes. She could not stand being seen as the daughter of a disgraced man, so she left. She changed her path. She chose to work quietly in noble households, unseen and unknown, rather than live off charity or beg for her old place in society. She never expected to see the Queen again, not like this. On the morning of the royal visit, the entire household stood in the courtyard in 2 long lines. The family stood closest to the entrance, dressed in their finest clothes. Behind them stood the senior staff, and behind them, along the back wall, stood the rest of the servants, heads bowed as tradition required. Elena stood among the servants, her eyes lowered like everyone else. Her heart was pounding, but her face stayed calm. The sound of horses and carriage wheels grew louder. Then, the royal carriage came into view, moving slowly up the long path toward the manor. The crowd grew silent, every person holding their breath. The carriage stopped. A footman rushed forward to open the door. The Duke and his family stepped forward, bowing low as the Queen's foot touched the ground. Queen Charlotte was dressed in deep blue, with a small crown resting on her silver-streaked hair. She smiled kindly at the Duke and his family, greeting them with warm and gentle words. The Duke straightened up, ready to lead her inside. But then, the Queen paused. Her eyes moved past the Duke, past the bowing nobles, past the rows of proud staff standing near the entrance. Her gaze swept toward the back of the courtyard, toward the line of ordinary servants standing with their heads down. And then her eyes stopped. She was looking straight at Elena. The courtyard fell into complete silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Then, something happened that no one expected. The Queen rose from her formal greeting stance. She stepped past the stunned Duke, past the confused nobles, and walked straight toward the back of the courtyard, toward the servants. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Griggs' hand flew to her mouth. Mr. Pembroke's face turned pale as paper. The Queen stopped in front of Elena. For a moment she simply looked at her, her eyes soft with emotion. Then, she reached out and took Elena's hands in her own. "Lady Elena," the Queen said, her voice warm and full of feeling, "it has been too long." The words echoed across the silent courtyard. Every servant, every noble, every guest, turned to stare at Elena, whose eyes had filled with tears she was fighting to hold back. "Your Majesty," Elena whispered, her voice trembling, "I did not think you would remember me." "Remember you?" The Queen smiled gently, still holding her hands. "How could I forget the girl who used to race me through the garden maze at the summer palace? I have thought of you many times over the years, and wondered where you had gone." The Duke stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, unable to speak. His family stared in shock. The staff exchanged looks of disbelief, whispering quietly to each other. The Queen turned to the Duke, still holding Elena's hand gently. "Lord Ashworth, I do not think you understand who has been living under your roof. Lady Elena is the daughter of the late Earl of Rothmore, a man I once called a dear friend, and a woman I have always considered like a sister." The Duke's face turned red with embarrassment. He looked at Elena, then at his staff, realizing with horror how she had been treated, scrubbing floors and carrying trays like any ordinary servant, when she was, in truth, a woman of noble blood. "My lady," the Duke said, stepping forward and bowing deeply, "please forgive us, had we known." "There is nothing to forgive," Elena said gently, lifting her head with quiet dignity. "I did not tell anyone who I was. I wish to be treated as an ordinary person, and that is exactly how your household treated me. I have no complaint." The Duke looked at her with new respect, understanding now that her calm strength and quiet grace had never come from wealth or title, but from something deeper within her. Later that day, after the formal visit had settled into a quieter gathering, the Queen sat with Elena in the Manor's private garden, away from the crowd. "Why did you leave, Elena?" the Queen asked softly. "You could have come to me. I would have helped you." Elena looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "I did not want help given out of pity, Your Majesty. When my father's name was ruined, I felt like every kind word people gave me was really about him, about his fall, about what I had lost. I wanted to know if I could stand on my own, without a title, without a name people recognized. I wanted to find out who I truly was, without all of that around me." The Queen was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "And what did you find?" Elena smiled, a small, honest smile. "I found that hard work does not shame a person. I found kindness among people who had very little themselves. I found that dignity is not something given to you by birth. It is something you carry inside, no matter where you stand in society." The Queen reached over and squeezed her hand. "You have grown wise, my dear. Your father would be proud of the woman you have become." Word of what happened at Ashworth Manor spread quickly through the countryside and beyond. People spoke of the humble servant girl who turned out to be a lady of noble birth, greeted by the Queen herself in front of an entire household. Some called it a fairy tale. Others called it a lesson about how true worth cannot always be seen from the outside. Back at the manor, something had changed among the staff as well. Mary, who had once simply seen Elena as a fellow worker, now looked at her with a mixture of awe and warmth. But more than that, the way the other servants treated each other began to shift too. They started to see that anyone among them might carry a story worth respecting, a past worth understanding, a dignity worth honoring, no matter their position. The Queen offered Elena a place back at court, a chance to reclaim her family's name, and rejoin the world of nobility she had once left behind. It was a generous offer, one that many would have accepted without a second thought. But Elena asked for time. "I am not ready to be simply the daughter of the Earl of Rothmore again," she told the Queen gently. "I want to walk my own path a little longer, to decide for myself who I wish to become, rather than stepping back into a name that was chosen for me by birth." The Queen nodded with understanding, not offended in the least. "Take all the time you need, Elena. The door will always be open for you, whenever you are ready to walk through it." As the royal carriage rolled away from Ashworth Manor that evening, the Duke stood at one of the tall windows, watching Elena walk slowly through the garden below, the last light of the sun falling gently across her face. He thought about how close he had come to overlooking her entirely, treating her as nothing more than a servant among many, never once suspecting the depth of character standing quietly in his own halls. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life, that true worth is often hidden in plain sight, waiting patiently to be seen by those willing to truly look. And Elena, walking through the quiet garden with the evening breeze around her, felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not shame, not fear of being seen, but peace, and a quiet hope for whatever she chose to become next.